The following is a conversation with Peter Boss. Peter is the author of The Road to Freedom and the Demise of Nation States. As well as an innovator and entrepreneur, Peter has founded and has become the president of Polydyne Inc., a multi-disciplinary management consulting company. Peter grew up being born in 1932 under Nazi-occupied Netherlands. This upbringing has given Peter a peculiar perspective on what it means not to be free. Peter has also developed a concept of proprietary natural governance using the concept of insurance providing protection for life and property of persons. Peter is one of the most optimistic people I've ever met, and I'm very excited to share my conversation with you. This is my conversation with Peter Boss. I'm very excited to have you here, Peter, for this conversation. I have your book right here, The Road to Freedom and the Demise of Nation States. And I want to begin with asking you for some advice. What advice can you give a person like me or any other person who has become viscerally or emotionally engaged in the current political situation and climate of the United States?
Well, I guess it's a simple answer to that, simple and complex in a way. This is all part of the evolution that we have been going through. People have been around 300,000 years, and it's only the last 3,000 years that we have really become acquainted with the concept of freedom and organization, social organization. Prior to this time, the social organization typically was either a tribal situation, family. Then, with the invention of agriculture, it became community organization. And subsequently, as we evolved, larger entities took over, theocracies, first city states actually. People grouped in for defense into the city states, which are also social organizations of a coercive type, but they had a certain amount of freedom there. Subsequently, we had the empires, which are really dictatorship to a large extent, trying to extend their control over the world, and like Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire, these great empires. And when they collapsed, the world fell back to a feudal system, which was pretty much controlled by philosophical, theological thinking. Therefore, we had theocracies. And out of that, we had a long period actually of what seemed to be stagnation, even though this is on the surface. Underlying has been always constant growth. The rate of growth since mankind first appeared 300,000 years ago is more or less constant. The rate of growth is the same. But as it is with any investment, if you start with a small amount, with a little bit of growth, you don't see anything for a long, long time. So the concept of evolution is really evolutionary, it's exponential. And so we moved into the Renaissance, which was the uh, recognition of intellectual thought, humanity, people interaction, and so forth. And so that was a very great period of growth. Again, we lapsed back into monarchies, and then subsequently we have lapsed into the concept of states. The concept of a state is a coercive organization whereby, like Plato's Republic, where certain people are in charge, they're elected, they're supposedly smart people. Other people are doing basic work, and you have the soldiers, the military in between to exact compliance with the rules that are set forth by the intellectual class. We're still in this latter framework right now. The state is a coercive monopoly whereby we elect certain people as our representatives. They make all the controls, and they have the power to enforce all of their laws and their regulations upon you. which means to that extent this is done, to that extent you are losing your freedom, because freedom really means that you have absolute control over your life and all derivatives of your life, including all your property, your intellectual, physical properties. Total control is total freedom. That we have as yet never achieved, and this is where hopefully evolutionary will be going to and will be achieving, and I think in a very short time. So in the meantime, you have coercive monopoly of coercion, which of course means that people, this is a win-lose situation. But when you have coercion, that means one person controls the other person. And the one person that controls is the winning party. The person that is being controlled is the losing party. What we see right now is a huge divide, not only philosophically, but also in the way they can perceive that they ought to be ruled. They have not conceived the concept that they should not be ruled at all. And this is the myth of the state.
I want to quote you because in your book, you give a very interesting perspective when you write, simply asking whether there is a need for state authority may provoke an immediate reaction even stronger than the response to questioning religious beliefs. Even to consider that their belief in the state may be erroneous, let alone disastrous, is traumatic for most people. Are we traumatizing people right now with our discussion about the myth of the state?
Are we doing exactly what? I didn't hear the answer.
Are we traumatizing people right now with our conversation about the myth of the state? As it is,
yes.
It's more than just a religious concept to some people.
No, it is, yes, right. It's very much part of their lives, and it's part of the long-term indoctrination process we have gone through. We learn from children how to obey the state and the law and the leaders of the state. We salute the flag. We do all these type of things without ever really questioning what are we really doing and what is the state. And the state, if you think about that, it is a coercive organization. We elect representatives supposedly to take care of all of the important things, to protect us from violation of property, protect us from aggression, and do many. And of course, they have a large scope right now of doing many other things, supposedly taking care of all the needs that people perceive that they have. And that comes from a central source. They have not been aware or thought about that, is this concept really necessary? And isn't this really akin to slavery? When somebody else tells you what to do, has the authority to make you do what they tell you to do, this is the essence of slavery. Freedom, by contrast, is to have absolute control and authority over your own life. But of course, admitting that, of course, everybody has that same right. And therefore, the only way we can interact with one another in a peaceful and cooperative way is by contract. It could be, it could be an actual contract, it could be a handshake, it could be anything that we do. By contract, there's two mutually exclusive ways by which people can interact in a society. And like I said, by contract is the one, and by force is the other. Contract is a win-win situation. Both parties gain because it's reciprocal. When one party contracts with somebody else, you do that only when there's a benefit to you and to the other party, and vice versa. With regard to a coercive exchange, one party wins at the expense of the other, because one party tells the other what to do and the other party has to obey. That means that that party that has to obey becomes actually enslaved to the extent that he has lost control over his own ability to do the things that he wants to do. It's a win-lose situation. And any win-lose situation always ends up in terrible consequences. And typically the people that arise in a system like that, like a state, like a nation state like we have right now with the representatives, assumes that these people have some insight that you as an individual don't have. They have something to offer you that you as an individual would like to have. And of course, a lot of people like to have handouts. What they do not realize is by accepting those things and by accepting the authority of others, they have enslaved themselves. And the state of enslavement has been the common norm throughout the evolution of mankind, really, the history of mankind. They have always succumbed to the authority of other people and never have ever conceived the possibility that they themselves could control their own life and have a society that is possible without anybody telling you what to do or interfering with your interaction in society.
I think one of the biggest things in our society today is this concept of war that a lot of people are disconnected from. They tend to think of a us versus them, and that when we go to war, we're really just killing, bad guys or terrorists. But people forget that there's also women and children who get caught up in drone strikes and things like this. And I think you have a really good point on war in your book when you write, war is conceivable only because of the myth of centralized authority. Without it, nation states could not declare war since no one would finance or show up for it. Um, would you mind elaborating on this development of collectivist warfare and why that really wouldn't be a thing amongst individuals?
Well, individuals may have conflicts from time to time, but typically they resolve the conflicts very rapidly. They're not productive. In the marketplace also, any conflicts are resolved quite rapidly because it's very unproductive for both parties. And so when you go on the larger scale of the state, the conflicts are promulgated by the concept of coercive authority. And when states talk to one another or not don't talk to another, that conflict becomes larger. Typically, not always, but there are, one party of power does not want to yield power to another party. It is not a contractual relationship typically between countries, except when they have good agreements, but typically they are not. We have tariffs, we have all kind of interferences between the free flow of goods and services and the contractual relationship between people when states interfere. And they can result into extremely large conflicts, as we witnessed in the last century. We had two world wars. We had World War One and World War Two. There were many other wars, but these were the two major ones. Killed about 170 million people as a result, and destroyed billions, trillions of dollars of property, all because some leaders, perceived leaders of their states, individual states, did not agree or wanted to increase the power that they already had within their state based upon their personal desires or a philosophical aspect thereof. So we have had a situation where you have large aggregations called the state, which is a large social organization, controlled, is a coercive monopoly, and it's really a conflict of major monopolies, essentially, state monopolies with one another. They are not typically dealing with one another contractually. They deal with one another on basis of power, because this is where the way the system is set up for them. Everything is based upon power, not upon the gains of contractual gains and profits and things like that. If they did, they would not be necessary. And of course, my concept is they are not necessary. The myth of the state is based upon the superstition that some authority is necessary to provide guidance. Otherwise, the result would be chaos, according to many people's thinking. And rather than leaving people alone in the pursuit of their own um, investment, their interest, and so forth, and dealing with one's own faults in a way. The problem with this myth is that if you give if people are so malicious, so careless, and so incapable of taking care of themselves, how is this problem resolved when you elect a subset of the same malicious, incapable, incompetent people and give them powers that you have as an individual do not have? When you do that, you have created the concept of the state and monopoly, and you have given up the freedom of your own contractual relationship with other people and your ability to resolve conflicts in a mutually satisfying way, which typically is the norm because individuals do not benefit from conflicts, they benefit from mutual exchange by contract. And so uh, typically also, so when you then start the concept of a state and you put people in power, the only really moral authority that you have is to delegate the powers that you have as an individual have. You only have a right to force in self-defense. That's the only right of force that you have. You cannot delegate any other rights beyond that right of self-defense to another group of people and have them forcibly make everybody comply with that concept. So you have a conflict here, and that is set up by the system itself. You are delegating to these people powers that you as an individual do not have, powers that you cannot transfer to a group or even an elected group. And the fact that they're elected makes no difference. You have to be, you can only transfer the right to self-defense and therefore the right of defense for your property. And when you go beyond that, and which most of the states, all of the states today do, when you go beyond that, you are creating a system that has monopoly power or coercion that you as an individual or even as a group of individuals do not have. And a system like that typically attracts people that love power, authority, and the gains that they can derive from that system. And so when you have a political system like we have today, people there are typically interested in authority, in power over other people, and the gains that they can derive from being in the system by playing the political games that they do. And that includes, of course, a very elaborate system of lobbyists and various other interests that seem to gain personally or for the representative organizations that put them there to increase their leverage in the competitive marketplace over others by coercion, using the monopoly of coercion. This is where you get all the conflicts. This is where you get all the power grabbing. This is why you see all the squabbling today amongst politicians, one against the other, not one with one another, one against one another.
Hmm. Um, I like again the terminology you use with the well, this is dealing with the personal enterprise system, but I think that goes more into to the market economy that would be set up. Uh, can you describe the demonstration approach and how combined with an intellectual revolution and the cornerstones of freedom, what that can produce? Um, as far as what I guess a typical a listener of this conversation may say, well, Peter, what you're describing might be anarchy, there will be chaos. How would we ever live in a society without the state? We need the state, of course, for keeping order. um, what would you say to that person, and then involving the I like the demonstration approach a lot. um, yeah.
Like the what approach?
The demonstration approach with the Declaration of Independence, and now on the eve of a intellectual revolution and knowledge power, exponential growth. in our society rather than linear growth. Um,
Well, the issue is really um, the growth is done by people. Everything is done by people, by personal enterprise. I prefer the term personal enterprise more than capitalism because capitalism connotes something different to many people that, that some people have all the capital and all the wealth in the world and so forth. This is not what capitalism is really. It's really a contractual exchange of property between people to mutual benefit. And it can be done at all levels, large and small. And these are voluntary associations between people that only result in a win-win situation. Um, as soon as soon as you bring in another concept, uh, even under the pretense of providing, for example, protection for your property, on a central basis, you establish a power monopoly. And as soon as you do that, it attracts people that are power hungry and that are nothing but troubles. They are typically not associated with the marketplace as people would like them to be, but they can be used by people in the marketplace. People like to gain access to all of the goodies in life by any means possible. And if there's a shortcut to that procedure, like the state, if that can do that for you, that's the least effort. They do not want to expend the effort of competition very often. So the personal enterprise system, as I prefer, is the exchange between people and leaving out the state for whatever reason. Many people say, well, we need the state because we need protection from other countries and other invasions and things like that. We need protection of our property and we need laws. And so typically, even the classical liberals and even the classical economists have ceded this power to the state. And my contention is that was a big fallacy, a major fallacy. The protection that we can get and that you would like to have can be obtained in the marketplace just like any other good and service. Same thing with law. You can contract for that in any way, shape, or form within the marketplace voluntarily, contractually. How is that done? Well, if I would like to have protection of my life, I would like to make a contract with somebody that has the same interest in my life and in my property as I have. And so many years ago, in 1960 something, in some discussion, that people were explaining about how we need the state for all of these protective services and for law. And my concept was that, hey, we already have organizations that provide for protection in the state, in society, for your property and for your life. And they have a proprietary interest in your life. If something happens to you, then they have to pay. And those organizations are called insurance companies. They have the same interest in your life, in your property, in your health as you have. It's a win-win situation. If you win because they protect you, they win because they don't lose money in case you do die or your property is stolen or you do get sick and don't recover. And so the issue of insurance is a concept that's relatively new in the world. It may be basically it was had a major developed in the 17th century in the Netherlands, in a small country, long time ago, 3 decades ago, 3 centuries ago, that was relatively free. And they developed a large mercantile fleet, the largest merchant fleet in the world. But they had a problem. Some of the ships would either succumb to the weather or by pirates and so on. So they figured out if you join forces and 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 jointly fund the individual loss that will be great to a particular company, but do it jointly, it would be greatly mitigated by a concept of insurance, by spreading the risk. So the concept of insurance is one of risk management. And so when something happens to your life, supposedly you're married, you have children, you're young, about 30, 40 years old, and something happens to you that's catastrophic. What happens to the family? Well, typically it will be very catastrophic. However, with insurance, you can spread the probability of somebody dying over a large number of people. We know exactly how many people die at a particular age from a particular population. This is done by the science of actuaries. And the chances that you die when you're 34 years old is very, very small. And so when you spread that risk to many people, you can provide an insurance policy that would cover the family with $1 million for maybe $30 a month, which is like one meal and so forth, which is the concept, of course, of protecting your family. And you can do the same for your property, for your home. Typically, of course, when you take a home, you have to have insurance anyhow that can be complied by the person that's financing your home if you don't finance the home yourself. But again, it spreads the risk of a fire or an earthquake or any of these concepts are statistically knowable and therefore actuarially calculable, and they're very much smaller than you as an individual carry. So the concept, same thing with health. With health, something happens to you, chances are when you're fairly young, even when you get older, it's pretty small, relatively small, and you know exactly what the risks are. Again, the concept of insurance will spread the risk, provide a policy of protection for you, real protection for you, that if something happens to your property, to your life, to your health, they will have a policy that has the same objective as you have: to be healthy, to have your property intact, to have your life, and if anything happens, you are covered. Now, the state has never been able to do anything like that. As a matter of fact, the state has the opposite incentive, actually. A person like my age, for example, I'm drawing from the government. I'm not really drawing from that. I paid into this, but I'm getting Social Security. If I die, the state benefits. I don't. This is the opposite of the insurance company. If I die, then the insurance company would have to pay. You see, and there's a contractual relationship by voluntary subscription, not by force. It's not, at all enacted by the concept of force. As a matter of fact, insurance companies want to diffuse any conflict, any destruction of property, any death. They want to make sure that you live long. The longer you live, the healthier you are, the better your property is protected, the more money they make. And of course, they make only within the limits of competition because there are many of these companies around. So the concept of insurance, to me, became the natural government that really has an interest in my life, that really wants to protect me, and really wants to diffuse any conflicts whatsoever. It's a win-win situation all the way for both myself and for the company and for society as a whole. The same concept applies to law and so forth. We had merchant law for centuries, since the Middle Ages, that dealt with conflicts. If you, as a person, traded say, in Milan, and you did not fulfill the term of your contract, and you showed up in some other place, like in Northern Europe somewhere, in a marketplace, the word had gone out that you cannot be trusted. You are not responsible, and you would be ostracized in a sense. You could no longer deal with them. And so the concept of common law, of customary law, is well established. It was well established throughout the last so many centuries. Unfortunately, it was overruled and actually integrated into authoritative law, which is a remnant of prerogatory law, which kings have. Kings saw this law, concept of law, as a profitable business for themselves. Profitable, quote, means theft. So they would just, and if they needed some money to throw somebody else in jail quickly and then appropriate their money, would be a win-win situation. So you had prerogative law, which we do today have with executive orders of the president, for example, in the United States. These are authoritative laws. The other authoritative laws, of course, laws enacted by Congress and so forth, which are imposed on everybody, not voluntarily, but at the interest of some special interest groups, typically, and therefore are coercively enforced because most people do not want to be governed by those, and so forth. So that leaves the concept of the jurisprudence again in a mess, creating conflicts within the country, creating the situation we're in right now when one political party is totally opposed to the other because they have different viewpoints as to how they coercively should manage you as an individual. And so in insurance and in a free marketplace, the common law, just any violation of property or life of property, including life, would be resolved by arbitration or mediation, which we still have today. We have still voluntary courts, and if you and the purpose of providing for justice is to make restitution, meaning bringing things that were broken back to its original state. And the concept of restitution, therefore, would force an individual to fulfill the terms of the contract. And if he doesn't, he would find social ostracism and economic ostracism. He would be out, just like under merchant law, when you committed the crime violating the rules of the contract and you showed up somewhere else, you were ostracized, economic and socially. And for example, the Netherlands in the 17th century, during their golden age, established the republic. And interestingly enough, they put nobody in charge. You had to put a stadtholder, called a stadtholder, in charge, but they gave him no power. And so for 1 century, the country lived with basically self-government. And the result was that this small little country, about 100 miles long and wide, the delta of 3 major rivers, most of it was underwater, Nederland, established a society that was wealthier than any other society ever, because it was all voluntary exchange. And a very interesting situation, Amsterdam became the wealthiest city in the world. It established the insurance concept to protect their fleet. It established the commercial bank, the first commercial bank, whereby people could borrow money and exchange money. It established a stock exchange with the Dutch East India Company, because they're doing worldwide trading, going all the way from Japan, South Africa, the Americas, all the way through the world. And so they established insurance concept, not only marine insurance, but covering everything else. And everything was done voluntarily. And if you, as a matter of fact, the stock exchange had a very interesting feature. There was a very interesting study done that showed that during those days, people were actually trading in derivatives, all without any supervision whatsoever. The only supervision was there that if you did not abide by the concept of trust, in other words, if you violated the terms of the contract, you were out. You had social, economic sanctions. And entire society operated for 100 years that way without any major physical force agency, coercive agency, controlling their actions of their life, and became the wealthiest, most prosperous country in the world, even though it's the smallest country in the world, even though most of it's underwater. And interestingly enough, there was a feudal society all around them. They owned the land by gaining it back from the sea, from being underwater, by building the dikes and established civil engineering, which is still great at the university I went to in Delft some time ago. Very big department of civil engineering. They gained the land from the sea and established property ownership in land, which was unheard of during the feudal society all around them. And so again, the concept of ownership and property ownership became very well established there. And only 6% of the land was owned by so-called nobles or the church, whereas in feudal society, 100% of the land was owned by these two sectors, the, the people in power and the church, combined, typically are always combined as two uh, twins almost, to achieve their monopolistic coercion over people and their control over people. It did not exist in the Netherlands. And so we have a beautiful example of what can be achieved in law, what can be achieved by contract in a society without any authority whatsoever. And so it is not a dream that we can do and set up a society without the political superstructure. We can do it. We are competent enough and willing enough and interested enough to do so if we just knew how to do it. And many people have never been exposed to this concept. They have never thought about it because you're so used to having a state and go to your election on a 4-year basis or 2-year basis, elect your representatives, and then you go home and you don't think about it. They do not think, and nobody, very few people think that about the possibility that, hey, we can do this all on our own, and we have organizations that do so, and organizations that diffuse conflict, like insurance companies, because it's very expensive, even internationally, to have conflicts. It destroys a lot of people, very expensive. And you don't have a central authority to collect taxes by force from people, and therefore have a huge amount of money, or either print the money to support an army. An army is a very expensive proposition. And so without taxes, nobody voluntarily wants to give money or their lives, their sons or their husbands to an organization that goes to war. In a private, in a personal enterprise system, people live by contract. They avoid conflict at all possible costs and work together cooperatively to get the maximum gain. And there is no subway to get out of it as you have today in the state, where you can have a lobby and then the lobbyists can pay off whoever representative you have, and he will then pursue the interest of you and it puts you in a competitive advantage, thereby pissing off all the other people and therefore creating conflicts. It does not exist in a free society. If you don't comply with what other people would like you to do contractually, you'll be ostracized economically and socially, like happened for 100 years in the Netherlands, and actually happened with the American Indians. The American Indians, if when the English settlers came here and had looked around and tried to learn something, what they called from these savages, uh, they called savages at the time, they could have learned something. They brought with them the English system of jurisprudence, English system of jails. Indians didn't have any jails. They settled their conflicts internally. They had the powwow. Somebody did not comply with the particular, if violated the contract or violated some property or stole something, he called into the meeting and had to make a restitution. And if he didn't comply with the restitution, he was socially and economically banned from the society. And no other society, word would get around, no other society would pick him up, and he would go out in the wild somewhere and probably kill him. Most of the time kill themselves because there's no way to survive without cooperation with other people and so forth. So they could have learned a lot from the Indians. Instead, they brought the English system over with military force, gained, took the land actually, rather than contracted for the land. And so we had a very bad start, even in the United States. Isabel Patterson in her book writes about this, and the word that came back to to England that these savages, quote, savages, uh, had no problem. They had no jails. And they seemed to be orderly by and large. Yeah, they had a couple of tribes fighting one another, but basically they were very peaceful people. And even when they came there, they didn't find them to be very hostile, and they wondered how that was. And so, in their thinking, of course, people were bad by nature, which is the same underlying principle that brings about the state that we have right now. People were bad by nature. They could not be trusted on their own. They needed some authority to take care of them. And if they behave badly, you throw them into jail. And so they thought, gee, these people have something, there must be something different about these people. And so they said that they called them the noble savage. The concept of the noble savage came about, which is very interesting because these people were far ahead in social organization than the English were, coming from their country, much more advanced in many other ways, technologically, etc., but very, very much behind the American Indians. And they had realized that these people didn't have a gene that was not necessary, that different from the English people, that they're the same people with the same needs, the same problems, and the same faults, etc. They would have been able to adopt the Indian system of government and not establish what we have today as a state government, nation state, the United States of America. And so again, to go back right to the beginning, we have to really think about how did we come about? Was this really the right way to do it, or could it have been another way? And if you think about that and think outside of the political system and outside the United States and the Constitution and all of the things that are inherent with it, even though the framers did a commendable job in trying to put something together that might work, uh, they did not succeed. As we see right now, they did not succeed. It's impossible to write things in a law like that. It has to be inherent with the nature of people, the way people are. And they should have followed the principle and thought about the principle of jurisprudence that the Indians had. And dealt with them contractually and established a society together with them in a much more non-forcible way, right? Not by bringing in the troops, the militia, and taking land and having politicians there that were bought off by money speculators because the revolution required money and that money was in default, by land speculators grabbing land and speculating on that. That could only be done by the mechanism of the state. So we had an oligarchy from the beginning and mercantilism from the beginning. We did not have free enterprise from the beginning. Now, the reason the United States grew and expanded and had as much freedom was by default, because the government could not grow big enough to control their lives, and they could not send the tax collectors far enough west without being tarred and feathered at the time. People did not stand for that concept. Unfortunately, over time, the state grew and grew like a cancer. And as it is today, it's consuming about the 30% of the entire national economy and controlling 100% of it, essentially. And therefore, by controlling other people controlling your life, you have lost your freedom, and you're really back to a large plantation where the masters are in charge. It's clear who is in charge. They can forcibly make you comply and do whatever they want. And so essentially, people have enslaved themselves without even knowing it. And by saluting the flag and saying the Pledge of Allegiance, they just repeating the same concept of, subjugating themselves to the will of a very small, power-hungry group of people. And this is what we're in today. So we have to think outside of this box and say, what can we do? How can we do better than that? And of course, the good ways, the ways to do it are the 5 cornerstones that I have in my book outlined. First, protection with insurance. Secondly, by concept of jurisprudence. Thirdly, that is customary, that's non-authoritative. Thirdly, by concept of private money. It should not be fiat money controlled by fiat money controlled by the state. Fourthly, by proprietary management of land and development and public services, very much like Disney. If you go to Disney World in in Florida, 40 square miles are controlled by a corporation. And there are policemen there, there is fire protection, there's police protection, there's very little crime. All the services are done underground in big tunnels. Energy is recycled, all the waste goes underneath, being put far away to be recycled and made to use. And so self-containing society where you have undivided ownership of land, a very important concept in a free society. Typically, land is an intangible property. And as an intangible property, you can't move it around. So if you have neighboring plots of land with different ownership, there's a huge conflict there. One person with his particular land wants to develop it one way, another wants to develop another way. Now, the state solution, of course, is zoning laws and so forth. But what's really necessary is what you did in some of the large shopping centers, the resort areas, Disneyland. You have a common ownership of the land by a person, by an organization that learns how to deal, provides all the services, all the public services, electricity and so forth, and leases out portions for development. And this is the concept of a free society where you have no zoning laws because there is no conflict. You bring the land interest together under one ownership. And within one ownership, you can orchestrate it. You have a leader there that can work with all the leaseholders, at least the tenants, to make it the most prosperous situation you can have. And of course, we have that with the large shopping centers, where all the owners work together with individual leaseholders, work together with the developer to have the best possible situation. And of course, you have the concept that if it doesn't work, you tear it down and build it again. And that was Mises called that, of course, constructive rebuilding, whatever, I forgot the name exactly how he called it. But yeah, so you do it and you continually renovate to optimize the value of this entire entity, but it has to be large enough. The concept of real estate is, a location, location, location. And you want to make the location such that you coordinate all the different elements by a central agency and cooperatively with the leaseholders by contract. And this is what Disney had in mind with Disney World. He was planning to develop a major free trade city, actually, and not only Disney amusement park, where you had commercial buildings, residential buildings, shopping centers, and everything else within 40 square miles, all controlled centrally, and then contractually, the ownership was divided in such a way that you had lease situations attractive to everybody. And unfortunately, he died too early. His brother Roy did not have the same vision. All we have now is Disney World, but it was really Epcot, experimental prototype city of tomorrow, Epcot. That was his vision, and it was the correct vision. And a lot of resorts today have that. In a resort, you don't have problems. You don't go in a hotel or in a resort, you don't have major conflicts. Everybody is there to do their business, contractually have fun, or just whatever you do. The same thing with huge shopping centers. It's a great way of bringing land together under central ownership. And this concept was developed by a person by the name of Spencer Heath a long time ago, and it is extremely important. And the other concept then is, of course, education. And what we have today is not education. We have indoctrination, obviously. Everybody comes out with the same, everybody is put down at the same time, open the book at the same page, taught the same course at the same time. This is not education. This is indoctrination, no matter how you look at it. The whole concept of learning is by maintaining curiosity and wanting to learn at your own pace. Children are different. People are different. One child is as different as the other and has different aspirations to how to grow and how to learn. And if you maintain that curiosity, people on their own will educate themselves without being indoctrinated with a particular book at a particular time when you have no particular interest in that particular subject. You can do your own thing at your own development. That was a system advocated and expanded by Maria Montessori in principle, where the emphasis was not on teaching and not on teachers. You don't teach somebody. You can't take a horse to water and make him drink. You can't take a child and have him open a book and make him learn. You have to maintain the curiosity that natural without within children and maintain it throughout their life so that learning becomes a lifelong process and where you can learn at your own pace and where the teacher is a mentor, is a stimulator, rather than somebody telling you, open your book, do this and that. You stimulate the child, expose them, try to get, of course, the basic elements of writing, arithmetic, and reading under control, but they do it with tools. And so in 1915, which was a very bad year all around, I'll come back to that maybe later, but the decision was made to go with the public school system, John Dewey, the progressive socialist John Dewey, to have children educated by the state on a central basis in lieu of the Montessori system, which was being embraced worldwide at the time. Bell and all the great innovators in the United States, Edison invited Maria Montessori. She had an exposition of her system in San Francisco, the exposition hall down there, where people can watch the creation of the creative mind at work of children. And as they were learning under this process, everybody supporting it except the state. At that time, the state decided to adopt a public school system because, after all the children had to learn, and they had to learn the particular thing. And a system like that, as Isabel Patterson pointed out, it's fraught with the situation of indoctrination because the state is going to bring its concepts across. The love for the state, the being subject to the state, and obedience, and all the concept that the state requires for people to remain under their control. And so that's the fifth cornerstone in my book, for example. And so it's a whole different concept. And this is what I'm trying to do in my book. I'm trying to open up people's thinking about social organization, how you can live together, two mutually exclusive ways. One is contractually, voluntarily, both parties gain, win-win situation. Mutually exclusive is coercively. You force people to do what other people think you ought to be doing, of course, by providing power and, of course, money in the form of taxation, which is a form of theft by the ruling class to fulfill their goals and their aspirations for power. And so they have to maintain control over the educational system. They have to maintain control over your life and make it almost impossible for people to think about there's another way, and there's always another way. And so evolution is probably going to steer us in this direction. We had a scientific revolution about 300 some years ago, followed by a biological revolution. I mean, we didn't have anesthesia, nothing until recently. I mean, operation, people would rather die than get an operated done because there was no pain relief. And the church was opposed to that philosophically also, on top of that. And then about 100 years ago, the last 100 years, the previous century, We had an enormous expansion in this the thinking that I'm talking about right now. A lot of people thinking about the concept of freedom, the concept of ownership, proprietary relationships rather than coercive relationships, and alternatives to the state. The states have been nothing but a problem and are a problem today. And we have to get more and more people to think outside of this box and to think, hey, is this the best that we can do, or is there another way? And I'm trying to point out the other way in my book.
One firm wall of this box that is difficult to break out of for some people is this concept of protection, and you develop this in your book. But for people who have not read your book, when they think of a proprietary society that has a natural government run by insurance companies, they can't conceive the concept of security and property protection, and they just admit that we have a necessary evil, but it's necessary and it's evil in order to have a police force, and they can't conceive another way of allowing a security agency that's run for profit to provide protection for people. um, can you elaborate on that, please?
Oh, yes. Well, I already elaborated somewhat on the insurance concept, which is a risk sharing concept with all major calamities. And there is a marketplace for that, obviously, because we have insurance companies to provide protection for all kinds of things. From you breaking your leg, from doing anything, from something falling on your head, from somebody invading your house. On the national level, they have the same thing. We have a huge, the protection of property is a big problem, but it's a big organization. And really, it's not only done on a local scale, on the national scale. Insurance companies are worldwide, and they co-insure with one another. It's a global concept. So insurance companies don't want conflict. If you want to avoid conflict, you would like to have insurance companies invested in all these different countries, and by nature, they would not attack one another because they're attacking property, and it would be a loss to them and to the stockholders. They would immediately lose the stockholders and the customers and so forth. So you need a huge organization and finances and managerial capability globally. Insurance companies do have that, much more so than individual states do have. Individual states, other than the United States, some of the big powers, they have even much smaller power actually than the insurance concept globally worldwide, which is interest. Now, insurance companies can contract for private police and private protection, like you have in a hotel in a resort area. You have private people. You don't see them walking around with uniforms, with badges and sticks and so forth. They're there. You go in a casino in Nevada and in Las Vegas, and you do something, all of a sudden some big people stand behind you. They walk you quietly out. I mean, really, and it's done regularly. Uh, the issue is that they're not in your way, in your face. The protection is there. They're hired by insurance companies, and the concept of how many should you have, you cannot solve that problem in a political organization. How many policemen do you need in the city? An insurance company knows exactly how to do that. The market will solve the problem, because if the cost of a policeman is 100,000 a year, and your property and you reduce and you have the cost of insuring going up uh, inversely to the number of people that you have protecting you, then $100,000, more than $100,000 loss in property overall would warrant one more policeman. You have this natural balance of marginal utility in Austrian economics, of marginal utility, where you balance the number of protection and the amount of protection required, not only in people, but in tools, in not weapons, but also in tools, and also in the law. is to balance the situation in such a way that it's optimized. If there's too many fires going on, the insurance company had control, for example, on the fires in California. They would have acted preventively long before that time because they could see that the loss of property there was much greater than the amount of effort required to clean up the mess or prevent fires from happening in the first place, which is very possible and was neglected by the state. The state typically does not do what it's supposed to do. They say they're going to do all the things, but they have so many avenues of spending money that is more attractive politically than doing the right thing in the first place. So if you want protection, always ask for protection from somebody that has a proprietary interest in not only your life, but in your property. And if you do that, you are on a worldwide basis, on a global basis, you have the protection without the conflict because insurance companies do not want to war one another. They do not want conflict. It's very expensive for them to do so. And the stockholders and the customers would not stand for it. So you have absolute control. You vote for, with your money, for the companies that you have, the insurance companies that you support, that you trust, and they in turn have to provide the service to the customer in such a way that they remain the loyalty of their consumers. And they have the same interest as you and I. Government does not have, state governments do not have that interest in your life. They have no interest in you whatsoever. It's well apparent if you look at the political climate today, they're not interested in you as an individual. You're just there to serve their purposes and to provide money for all the things that they think ought to be done in the world. And they're by definition not the smartest people, because the smartest people would not go into politics. The only people that want to gain from the system, that have no capability, want to gain from the system, typically those are the people that want power and that want to have all the things, the benefits that come with it. They want the beautiful buildings, the edifices, they want chauffeur-driven limousines, they want all the beautiful buildings like Washington, D.C., all the beautiful buildings. With the last riots, nobody asked the question, what was more important, the protection of the shop owner in Portland, whose shop got broken into, or the congressional building? No, I'm not condoning any violence for that. It's not necessary. But when there's violence, you see, the protection of property, of private property, should have been the paramount thing, more than public buildings. You see, and so you have this imbalance right now that we have in a society with, of course, all the aggression that's built in because people are revolting against or abetting in revolting in a society. You don't have that in a free society because people don't gain anything from a free society. There's a lot to be gained in a political society to do that. And so my abhorrence was what's going on right now in violence in general, but especially violence against private property. The government is supposed to protect you. And going back to your original question, should I trust the state government or should I trust an insurance company? I put my bet on somebody that has a proprietary interest in protecting your property.
Will we ever see a proprietary natural government?
Yes, you will. As a matter of fact, I just mentioned the 17th century, the Netherlands came as close. It's not well known to most people, but it's in it's one appendix in my book, and I will have more elaboration in my current book on this situation. It was not totally perfect, but it was as close as we could have come to freedom. Same thing with America without a central government, a large central government, came as close to freedom as we ever could think of. I mean, we came close. We came close. Unfortunately, there are federalists that wanted to build a federal government. We had English colonies, 13 English colonies, English law with governors and government setup of Congress in each of these states. we had a system that we brought with it that was very hard to get rid of in their minds. And so they organized that way. And then they had the Federalist movement for the United States of America. It worked fine in the absence of it coming about. But when it finally became a reality and the government grew to the size it is today, it has destroyed individualism, and we have become, just like any other country, collectivistic society. The rights of the individual are continually violated at the expense and for satisfying the quote collective. And the collective, of course, is nobody really except the politicians who enlarge their own fortunes and their own power in the system. So if people worry about private protection, they should worry about what they have today and then think of the alternative. The alternative is a lot prettier than what we see today and what we have today.
And also in the United States, we had the hijacking of the progressive movement. And as you explain in your book, the regressive progressive doctrine. And I think Murray Rothbard elaborates on it a little bit in his book, The Progressive Era, where he explains how the progressive movement was a right-wing takeover where corporations began to use the progressive movement almost, I think, as a Trojan horse for incorporating their corporations amongst individuals in the American society. But what is your take on the regressive progressive doctrine?
Well, the current progressive movement, of course, is a collectivistic movement, collectivism being a generic term for socialism and fascism and so forth. We have a one-dimensional spectrum right now. The left wing is of collectivism, and collectivism is not private ownership of property. It's sacrificing the individual to the collective. That's what's collectivism, as opposed to individualism. We have our spectrum, political spectrum, which is purely collectivistic. The left-hand side of the collectivism or socialism is communism, where you have outright ownership of the state, of property, life and property of people. You cannot own your own property. The right wing, and this is the European left and the right also, is fascism and Nazism, where you have government control by law of your property. In name, you still have the property, but in fact, they control every aspect of your property. And so you have the concept of fascism, Nazism. When they think of these concepts as opposite, they're not. They're the same. They fight one another because the Nazis wanted to be superior and take over the communists, but they have the same philosophy called collectivism, as opposed to individualism, where you have individual ownership, no sacrifice. The concept of altruism, which is the concept of sacrifice, both religiously and politically, is giving up a lower good, a higher good for a lower good. The concept, excuse me one second. Mm-hmm. But you have the concept. So you have a spectrum right now where you have a left-wing communism and the far left, really radical communism, the right-wing fascism, and also our political democracy, which is kind of a combination, and extreme people in that end. And you have the middle of the road situation. As Mises pointed out, the middle of the road, and also Hayek, the road to serfdom, the middle of the road leads to socialism, to either fascism or communism, and so to serfdom, and people will lose their freedom. What is missing? It should have been a two-dimensional. It should have been a pyramid. One side of the pyramid should have been individualism. The bottom part of the triangle is that left right-wing spectrum of communism, fascism, and then in between the Fabian concept of middle of the road situation, which is a mixture of the two, which we have today. Now, in the further away you go from this axis into the direction of individualism, the better off a society is. And for a long time, the US didn't have the central government, so there was powerless this bottom. So we had a lot of freedom. As the government expanded, the state expanded, rather, I shouldn't say that government. The state expanded, that freedom is being lost more and more, and is almost gone. So the progressive movement is the movement to collectivism, and it's regressive by nature because we are losing our freedom, and this movement is very insidious in that it cannot lose in a political atmosphere between, for example, what we have in two-party system, Republicans and Democrats, because they have to compromise. Every time you compromise, no matter how little, it's a gain for the progressive movement, which is progressive movement being the middle of the road socialist concept, collectivist concept. So it's a gain no matter what. As time goes on, over time, the compromises that they make with one another, as in the United States is a two-party system, other countries are multiple-party system. All the compromises made means a growth of the disease called state, really, and the loss of individual power, of individualism. So we're moving further away from the apex of the triangle that should really be political spectrum, and we are almost at the bottom of this socialist collectivist axis, and that movement is growing no matter what party is elected. Remember, Republicans or Democrats, they all enact new laws that in some way obstruct individual freedom, and every law that's passed or compromised is a win for the progressive. So it's a net gain system that cannot be stopped except by expelling the total system, by rethinking the entire system and moving towards freedom, towards the top of the triangle, and get away from this axis, the left wing, right wing axis, which is very confusing to many people anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
But the Nazi Party was a right wing party. The Communist Party in Russia was a left wing collectivist party. And the in between is where all the other countries are. And it's all collectivistic, very little individualism left in this spectrum. So we have to correct the political system. People have to start thinking about the other axis. That's what my book is all about.
You have this quote, which I love, is, however, what cannot be controlled, even under slavery, is individual intellectual freedom. Um, with a worldwide power shift, what is necessary is knowledge power. And I guess, what advice can you give to the individuals who are intellectually curious, looking to diverge from this road to serfdom and collectivism?
The advice is well, basically the solution is quite simple in a way. We inherited philosophically from the empiricist John Locke that there is a consent, that people consent to the power of the state. And there's a social contract, implicit social contract we have with the state. The easiest way to get rid of it, in a way, is to abstain from giving this consent. They're there by our consent. They have no power with our consent. So the thing is the easiest way would be to withhold the consent, but that's not going to happen because you would have to educate all the people like we are talking right now in the country. And by majority, since we have a majority system, that would be a lot of people and so forth. So the way to do it, the way to get out of this thing, is to build smaller communities somewhere that are free, like Amsterdam was at one time, but freer than that even, and like a Singapore, like a Hong Kong, and to find that enough property. It doesn't take many square miles. Like 24 square miles is the size of Manhattan Island. You could develop a free trade city uh, on 24 square miles and implement all of the things that they have in my book right there and show that the growth of such a small area and such development uh, would be so far superior to anything that the rest of the surrounding area would offer them that people would gravitate to them. And how do you start that and how do you get there? Well, we might be getting there sooner than later. We'll probably find the United States in some possible way of secession. The way the conflicts are right now, the severity thereof, the differences and the hatred between the groups, and is so great that uh, it will be very hard to maintain a United States of America as it is. Uh, the larger the government is growing, the more power there is to be divided, uh, the more the conflict will be between people. And we are very divided today. And it's happening very rapidly, much more rapidly than most people think. Uh, so there might be a breakup, and it might provide an opportunity for establishing some more freedom somewhere in the world, in the United States even. The other one is to uh, enough people to lease, long-term lease, a piece of land. Say, supposedly you go to Europe, pick any country, Greece, for example, because of the birthplace of freedom in the first place. It'd be nice to reestablish Greece that way as the birthplace of real freedom. And make a lease contract. Pay them up to 999-year lease situation where you pay them $1 billion a year or something like that, where they can also invest in this thing. You'll provide, number one, employment by building a free trade city there. And there's great unemployment in Europe, and especially in country like uh, Greece. You provide revenues to the government. They don't give up the land, so they don't say, "Hey, you gave the land away, you lease it, lease the situation." But you want autonomy, and you could build a, a city like Singapore with total freedom that way. Maybe we can do in the US, somewhere in the world, we can start that. Once the concept of freedom becomes more widespread, there will be more people to invest in such a concept and more pressure to do so. And with the breakup of these states, the way it is, um, you know, um, things are happening so fast, I can't predict, but I know it will happen. I know it's going to happen. It happened in Amsterdam 300 years ago. It can happen here in the world today, very soon, very rapidly, because we have essentially the foundation for a free society. We have all the aspects thereof. We know how to protect people. We have insurance companies. We know the concept of common law. We know how to enforce the common law by economic and social sanctions, because that can be imposed by the concept of private enterprise money, which will be individually issued. And if you do not make restitution or comply with mediation, you will not issue money. So you will, like the Indians, you will be expelled from your group. Really, you cannot trade. We have the educational possibilities of freedom under freedom. Montessori method maybe, but something like that with modern technology imposed. And we have the concept of land ownership, because the city can be built on one or two privately owned, corporately owned, jointly owned pieces of land with leaseholding, inviting all the new skyscrapers and everything to be built thereupon. And we have essentially a free market like Singapore in trade, That's Singapore in terms of personal freedom. But these cities, I mean, China is building one city after the other. It's no great problem to build a big city and to have a new uh, city, except it can be done under freedom. And so I think the opportunity will present itself in the very near future. And because people will see more and more defaults that are with the state and get more and more disenchanted with the state as they are disenchanted with the political government today. And so there will be opportunities. And it's like I said, everything is done exponentially in the world. We have been exponentially growing. Uh, and part of the turning point is the last century of the development philosophically of basically Aristotelian thinking rather than Platonic thinking. Plato had the concept of republic, which is very much like we have today. It's a political democracy. Um, he had the three classes. He had the upper class, of course, the people that know everything. They were in charge. They had the soldiers to enforce it, and everybody else had to be, accordingly. So his concept of republic and his republic is what we have today. So that's old. Philosophically, we now can think beyond that. We can think of all the things we have. We have new ways, and I'll be implementing probably the monetary system, sometime private money. We have all of the tools necessary to build a total free society. And at any opportunity which may present itself more rapidly than most people think, uh, we can do so. And so then, by demonstration of only one unit like that, will be a major expansion worldwide because people will look upon that and say, oh my God, these people can do that. They never thought about the concept before because they have been so long and so much indoctrinated with what the state is supposed to be. You have to have a state after all. How can you live? How can you live without the state? The issue is you can. When you demonstrate that you can, somewhere in the world, anywhere in the world, people will flock into the concept like you wouldn't believe because there's proprietary interest in their lives to make their lives better. And so they will copy. And so there will be an expansion. And as it is, there's a lot of secession going on in the world. There's a lot of secession. If you look at the map, all the boundaries of nation states that we have today, which are internationally sanctioned countries and states, are artificial. They were all created by force. There is not a boundary established, even in the United States, not a boundary established that was not created by force. The United States boundary was created by force. So what this will do is will blow that concept out of the water. You look at the new map of, there's a map out there, and I tried to get a hold of it. I haven't gotten a hold of it. Doc Casey had floating a map around of all of the potential breakouts that there are. And if you look at that map compared to the current map, I mean, it's like 100-fold increase or something like that of all of these places that want to secede. Barcelona, Venice, all of these areas, they want to break down in smaller units. So it will be concept of decentralization, because what you really, after all, want, I have some statement here, by Anthony Gregory. The real triumph of civilization is the extent to which coercion is banished from human relations. And the triumph is what will come about because it's natural. All the other systems are unnatural. Coercion is unnatural. Contract is natural, and so forth. So it will come about, and it'll come about a lot faster than that because we have the foundation of the last 100 years of philosophical thinking. Philosophically, we had Aristotelian concept coming back through Ayn Rand, even though she did not support the type of thinking politically, she's still enthralled by a constitutionally limited government situation, like many people were at the time and are still are today. She didn't dare to look outside of the box because she didn't know about the concept of insurance. It never hit her. But philosophically, we have the foundation in ethics of individualism, because her ethic is an individualist ethics. It's an individual right to life from which all property rights are derived in a society. And the concept of property rights uh, is a contractual situation between people. And so we'll move in that direction. We're moving very rapidly in that direction. But like everything else, all developments on an exponential basis are unseen by most people because the bottom of an exponential is not visible with an individual lifetime. The turning point of an exponential comes when the progress that's being made is visible within the lifetime of an individual. And we have two things going. Number one, our lifespan is increasing. Like mine is, I hope to live 100 years. Used to live, people used to live 25, 30 years or something like that. By the time you get done with procreation, you have maybe 5 or 10 years left to develop anything. If you live to be 100, you have 80 years left to develop things and to bring about things. So we're moving in that direction. With more people living longer. And it doesn't take many people to make changes, really. IDs can be written down by individuals. They have a long enough lifetime to do so. And more of those things will come about. So, and we see more and more of the corruption. So we'll be more and more inclined to go after freedom. So freedom is a concept that is not elusive. I think we'll see it within our lifetime. I think we're in the bend of the exponential curve. About 300 years after the scientific revolution, I think we'll see a social revolution and evolution that people can't even conceive of today. Most people won't even see it, but some people can. And that see some people can is evident by the fact that so many great people have written great books about this concept. And I'm not the only one, obviously. I stood on the shoulder of giants before me to be able to incorporate my concept with their concepts. And so that's what my book is all about.
Well, Peter, thank you very much. That was an amazing conversation. And if you can mention what you're currently working on or occupying your time with, and where people can maybe contact you or find your work, um, that would be great.
Well, number one, of course, they can get my book. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere. It's The Road to Freedom and the Demise of Nation States. Uh, book is available also from Lulu with my publisher, or Free Trade Press is my own publishing company actually. Cheaper there than on Amazon, so they can go to my title and find it there, or they can go to freetradecities.com, which is a website that steers directly to the book. It's on hardcover, it's in paperback, and it is, of course, an ebook available. So that's a source of information. Within the book, I have spent a lot of time of bringing together uh, the books and the bibliography of all the books that pertain to this concept, freedom, and that excuse me, and that are important. And and like I say, I'll be opening my website again, uh, and probably run a blog on that or something like that. But right now, I don't have that going yet. Personally, I'm so busy right now on two other things. I'm working on another book, The Torch of Freedom, uh, and really the philosophical impact on the evolution of society, going all the way back for 3,000 years. And the first concept of freedom came about in Greece, following that philosophically all the way down the Platonic thinking or the Aristotelian thinking. Um, and uh, that will actually be a precursor to my current book in a way, because it will lay down the philosophical foundation of what I'm talking about in really making it happen, which is in my book, is the five cornerstones, is how it can come about. And so, and then I'm working with you, of course, and other people to bring the word and come to spread the word and get more people to think about it. And the critical mass doesn't have to be very, very large. Most people do not think independently, do not want to. Thinking, we are blessed that we are volitional beings, but the negative side of that is it requires thinking in order to live. If you don't think, you probably have to follow somebody else, and then you still have to make a choice. Who are you going to follow? So most people are followers in life, uh, unfortunately, but that's how it is. Um, but uh, evolution is such that more people gain insight. There's an expansion of thinking, like you are. You went somehow we met indirectly
through
through you being in school and through an intermediate person that happened to read my book, who I met in another meeting at some time in my life. And so this is how concept came about. And it was very fortunate. It was very wonderful to meet you in person at the time I went to school. I have been invited to the Occidental College to give some guest lecture sometime. I'd like to give a whole course on the new book I'm writing, because the whole philosophical concept and also this book was very interesting. But apparently it was the textbook that was for part of your education, and so this is how we got acquainted, and this is how you got interested, and you are doing your best in spreading the word, and hopefully based upon your work, there will be other people picking up from that and expanding this exponentially in some way. And like I said, it doesn't take a majority of people. Most people, by definition, because it takes effort to think, most people do not think independently, but the ones that are can have a tremendous influence. But it takes only a very small amount of thinking, of thinkers, to bring a new concept about. And once it catches on, especially if you can demonstrate it somewhere, people say, "Oh my gosh, why didn't they think of that before?" You see. So they'll get them out of their comfort zone and get them to think about outside of the box and say, hey, all this stuff going on around us, is this really necessary? Do we really need these people in Washington? Do we need them really in Sacramento? Do we need them at the city hall, at the county office? We don't need them. We're subject to a layer of about 8 or 9 different government in the United States. We have the federal, we have the state, we have the county, we have the water district, we have the city, we have homeowners associations. All of them can impose fines and coercively make you comply with their laws. Even homeowners association, they have a tremendous amount of power. People do not realize. You see, so the other thing I'm working on is on money. I'm trying to get a patent for individual enterprise money. I can't go into that obviously since I'm in the patent process, but sometime in the future I can discuss that. It's very unique in that the other thing that's happening is that with the bureaucracy expanding as it is right now exponentially, the money debt is expanding also exponentially. And even with my book, my second edition of the book, the 1918 edition, 2018 edition, the graph that I have, which is an exponential fit to the debt, is stopped at $20 trillion. Right now, we are beyond that about $24 trillion. So we're outside of the curve of that in a book that was only published a couple of years ago, or republished a couple of years ago. It cannot go this way. So the money system that we have in 1913, the Federal Reserve System was established, and at the same time, the income tax was established. The Federal Reserve System, so that it would go off the gold standard. I'm not an advocate of gold standard, unless some Austrian economist but you need a money system that has true value backing, that is commensurate with current technology, with other words, the internet, virtual money, We go to the direction of virtual currency and the cryptocurrency. The cryptography is enormously expanded, and so it's very secure. So we can have a central ledger of bookkeeping, credits and debits, but the issuing of money is the key issue there, so that the money supply, the money that will be issued will be retired and that will not expand like we have. Right now, since the Federal Reserve system in 1913, the money, the dollar value of the 1930 dollar has decreased to about 2 cents. Every 21 years, the value of the dollar, therefore the cost of living, consumer price index, increases by a factor of 2 or decreases in terms of value of the dollar. So if you do that 5 times since 1913, you take a dollar and get a 50 cents and 25 cents and 12.5 cents and 6.25 cents, and you're down to 2 cents very rapidly today. Before the Federal Reserve System, the dollar value was increasing at 0.5% per year. So the 1913 dollar should have been $1.64 today. It's right now 2 cents. So a system like that with fiat money, fiat currency, has to be replaced by something. And Bitcoin established a precedent, of course, of crypto money. It's not one I favor because it's very unstable. You need a stable currency that's commensurate with the growth of the economy. That is, money issue has to be private and it cannot be done by the state, and it has to be global. So we don't have all the currency divisions between different states and so forth like that. So I'm working on that, on a global concept. If I get it established, I have all the tools available, the electronic transmission and all of the things like that, the credit scoring and all of the things were permitting people who should be issuing the money, which are producers, to issue the money and not the state. And so it's a whole different concept. And so I have some of that in my book. I didn't make it too detailed there because I was in the process of establishing that. If I can get it into the loop, it'd be a tremendous gain for me personally, of course, but for the world as a whole. And I could use a lot of that money to establish Free Trade City somewhere at the beginning of that. So I'm working on that. And other than that, I'm running out of time.
All right. Thank you, Peter.